Juanito heard noises at dawn and thought it was nothing, but when she left the house, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell woke up startled in the middle of the night to strange sounds coming from the vacant lot next to her house. Having lived alone for 3 years since losing her husband Harold, she had grown accustomed to the silence of the night, but those noises were different from the usual sounds of the wind or stray cats. That's when she decided to investigate what was happening in the neighboring yard. She put on her robe and slippers, grabbed an old flashlight and opened the back door. What she saw on the other side of the low fence made her heart race. A young woman, appearing to be around 30 years old, was sheltering with 4 small children under the rubble of a small structure that had been swept away by the severe flood the previous night. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still muddy and full of puddles. The children, 3 girls and a boy, were huddled around their mother, all wearing soaked clothes stained with mud. The woman held the youngest in her arms, a boy who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, while the other children clung to her wet skirt. Mrs. Dorothy stood still, watching for a few minutes, not knowing what to do. Her first reaction was suspicion. Who were these people? How had they gotten there? But upon seeing the children shivering from the cold, something inside her stirred. "Hey, are you all okay over there?" she shouted over the fence, startling the young woman. The stranger looked up, revealing a thin, tired face with tear tracks mixed with dirt. "I'm sorry, Mum. We didn't mean to cause trouble. The flood swept away our little house and we had nowhere to go," she replied in a weak voice. The children shrank back even more when they saw Mrs. Dorothy. The oldest, a girl of about 12, protectively hugged a younger sister, around 8 years old. The middle boy, who must have been about 10, stood in front of his mother as if wanting to protect her. "How long have you been here?" asked Mrs. Dorothy, walking to the gate that separated the 2 properties. "Since yesterday afternoon. When the water receded, we ended up here. We didn't know this place had an owner," explained the woman, trying to stand up with difficulty. Mrs. Dorothy looked at the still dark sky. Dawn was still a few hours away. The children were visibly hungry and cold. The youngest of the girls, who seemed to be about 6, was whimpering softly. "What's your name?" asked the widow, opening the small gate that led to the vacant lot. "I'm Rebecca, Ma'am, Rebecca Carson, and these are my daughters, Ashley." She pointed to the oldest. "Emma," she indicated the middle one. "Lily," she showed the youngest girl, "and my youngest son, Timmy." Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out, now continuing. Mrs. Dorothy felt a tightness in her chest upon hearing the children's names. She remembered when she and Harold had dreamed of having children, but never could. She looked again at the devastated family and made a decision that would change all their lives. "Come inside my house. You can't stay out here in the open," she said, surprising even herself. Rebecca hesitated for a moment. Could she trust this unknown woman? But feeling Timmy shivering in her arms, she had no choice. "Are you sure, Mum?" "We don't want to be a bother," she murmured. "A bother is letting children go cold and hungry. Come on, come in," insisted Mrs. Dorothy, motioning for them to follow her. The small family slowly walked to the widow's house. The children stayed glued to their mother, still fearful of the situation. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell's house was simple but cozy, with well-preserved antique furniture and the distinctive smell of a grandmother's home. "Sit here in the kitchen while I get some towels for you to dry off," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, pointing to the chairs around the table. She went upstairs and got the thickest towels she had. When she came down, she found the children sitting quietly, observing everything with curious eyes. Rebecca still had Timmy in her lap, who had fallen asleep despite the discomfort. "Here, dry yourselves well, I'll make some hot tea for you," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, handing over the towels. While preparing the tea, she discreetly observed the family. The children's clothes were torn and very dirty, but they seemed to have been nice once. Rebecca wore a simple dress that had seen better days. They were all too thin. "How long has it been since you've eaten properly?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, serving the tea in mismatched cups. Rebecca lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "A few days. I lost my job last week and the little money I had ran out," she confessed. "And the children's father?" asked the widow, trying not to sound too curious. Rebecca's face closed off even more. Ashley, the eldest, held her mother's hand as if to comfort her. "We don't have a father, ma'am," said the girl with a disturbing maturity for her age. "It's just the 5 of us." Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell felt her heart tighten again. She decided not to ask any more questions at that moment. It was obvious there was a painful story behind this situation. "Well, for today you'll stay here. Tomorrow we'll talk about what to do," she said, finishing serving the tea. The children drank the hot liquid eagerly, and Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell noticed how hungry they were by the way they held the cups. She opened the refrigerator and took what she had: some bread from yesterday, cheese and milk. "It's not much, but it's what I have for now," she said, preparing simple sandwiches. "You're already doing so much for us," thanked Rebecca, her eyes welling up. When they finished eating, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell showed the living room sofa. "The girls can sleep here, and you two," she looked at Rebecca and Timmy, "can use my guest room. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." "I can't accept this. You don't even know us," protested Rebecca. "That's exactly why. If I knew you, maybe I wouldn't let you in," joked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, trying to ease the tension. "Now go rest. Tomorrow we'll think about what to do." The children settled in as best they could. Ashley lay on the larger sofa with Lily, while Emma stretched out on the armchair. Rebecca and Timmy went to the small back room. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell went up to her room, but couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what she had just done. Her quiet, solitary life had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes, but something inside her felt different, as if a void she had carried for years was being filled. The next morning, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell woke up early as usual and went downstairs to prepare coffee. She found Rebecca already awake in the kitchen, trying to tidy things up. "Good morning, Mrs. Dorothy. I was trying not to make any noise," said Rebecca, looking rested despite everything. "Good morning, dear." "How was your night?" asked the widow, turning on the stove. "Better than in a long time. The children slept well. We don't know how to thank you," replied Rebecca sincerely. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell began to prepare a heartier breakfast than she was used to. She made scrambled eggs, fried some slices of bread, and warmed milk for the children. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," said Rebecca, watching the preparations. "Children need to eat well," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. One by one the children woke up, drawn by the smell of the food. Timmy was the first, still sleepy but smiling timidly at Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. The girls appeared soon after, more relaxed than the night before. During breakfast, Mrs. Dorothy observed the family's dynamics. Ashley helped her mother take care of the younger siblings, cutting the bread into small pieces for Lily and wiping Timmy's face. Emma was talking quietly with her brother, making up little stories to distract him. "You are a very close family," commented Mrs. Dorothy. "We're all each other has," replied Ashley, with a seriousness that didn't match her age. After breakfast, Mrs. Dorothy turned to Rebecca. "Now tell me properly what happened to you," she asked, sitting down at the table. Rebecca took a deep breath before she began to speak. "I worked as a housekeeper for a family here in the upscale neighborhood. Mrs. Patricia, the employer, was always demanding, but she paid properly. I lived in a small house that she rented to me at the back of her property," began Rebecca. "And then?" encouraged Mrs. Dorothy. "Last week she found out I had children. I had never told her because I knew she didn't like children. I always worked while they were at school or with a neighbor," continued Rebecca, nervously fidgeting with her hands. "And she let you go because of that?" asked Mrs. Dorothy, indignant. "Worse. She said I had lied to her, that she couldn't trust someone who hid important things. She gave me a week to move out of the little house and find another job," explained Rebecca, her voice choked. Ashley held her mother's hand. "Mom tried to find other work, but everyone wanted references from the previous employer. And Mrs. Patricia said she wouldn't give a good reference to any mother," the girl added. Mrs. Dorothy felt a growing anger in her chest. How could someone be so cruel to a family? "And your relatives? Isn't there anyone who can help?" she asked. Rebecca shook her head. "I came from a small town in the countryside. My parents have passed away and I have no siblings. I came here a few years ago looking for a better life for the children," she explained. "And their father?" insisted Mrs. Dorothy, even knowing it was a delicate subject. Rebecca looked at her daughters, who lowered their eyes. "It's complicated," she murmured. Mrs. Dorothy realized it wasn't the time to press the subject. There were many wounds in that family that hadn't yet healed. "Well, the important thing is that you're here now. Let's think about how to resolve the situation," she said, trying to maintain an optimistic tone. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing." At that moment, the front doorbell rang. Mrs. Dorothy got up to answer it, leaving the family in the kitchen. It was Mr. Walter, the long-time neighbor. "Good morning, Dorothy. I came to see if you're all right after yesterday's rain. I saw some strange movement here at your house early on," said the man, trying to look over her shoulder into the house. "Everything's fine, Walter. I just have some visitors," replied Mrs. Dorothy, not wanting to give too many details. "Visitors? You never have visitors," insisted the neighbor, clearly curious. "Well, new times," she replied curtly, preparing to close the door. "Dorothy, you need to be careful. With this flood, a lot of lost people are wandering around. It's not good to have strangers in your house," advised Mr. Walter, with a tone of concern. "Thank you for your concern, but I know how to take care of myself," said Mrs. Dorothy, closing the door before he could insist further. When she returned to the kitchen, she found Rebecca and the children silent, having clearly heard the conversation. "I'm sorry. Mr. Walter has always been very curious," said Mrs. Dorothy, trying to ease the situation. "We understand, Mrs. Dorothy. We don't want to cause trouble with your neighbors," said Rebecca, already getting up from the chair. "Maybe it's better if we leave." "No, not at all. You stay. And don't mind Walter. He likes gossip, but he's not a bad person," insisted Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. But she knew the family's arrival wouldn't go unnoticed in the neighborhood. Soon the whole street would be talking about Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell's visitors. For the rest of the morning, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell showed the children the house. They were impressed with the large backyard, where there were some fruit trees and a small chicken coop with 3 hens. "Can I play with the chickens?" asked Timmy, excited for the first time since they'd arrived. "Of course you can, sweetie, but be careful not to scare them," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, smiling at the boys' enthusiasm. Lily ran to join her brother, while Emma was interested in the plants Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell grew in pots. Ashley, more reserved, stayed close to her mother. "Your house is very beautiful," commented Rebecca, observing how carefully everything was organized. "It was my Harold's house. He planted these trees, built the chicken coop. I just keep everything as he left it," explained Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell with a sad smile. "I'm so sorry. How long has he been gone?" asked Rebecca delicately. 3 years. A sudden heart attack. We didn't even have time to say goodbye," the widow shared, the pain still in her voice. "That must be very hard," said Rebecca, understanding the loneliness Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell had been facing. "It was. But this morning, seeing the children playing in the yard, I remembered how Harold dreamed of having grandchildren running around here," confessed Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, surprising herself with her own sincerity. Rebecca felt her eyes fill with tears. It had been a long time since she'd met someone who showed so much affection for her children. In the afternoon, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell decided to go to the corner market to buy more food. The family had grown and the pantry was empty. "Ashley, you come with me. We'll go shopping," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "I can stay with the little ones," offered Rebecca. "No, you come too. The children can all stay together playing in the backyard. It's safe," decided the widow. On the way to the market, Ashley held Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell's hand as if she were her real grandmother. The girl seemed to be allowing herself to be a child for the first time in a long while. At the market, Mrs. Martha, the owner, immediately noticed the presence of Rebecca and Ashley. "Hi, Dorothy. Who are your companions?" asked the shopkeeper, not hiding her curiosity. "This is Rebecca and Ashley. They're staying with me for a few days," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell simply. "Oh, relatives from out of town?" insisted Mrs. Martha. "They're friends," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, picking up a basket and starting to choose the items. Mrs. Martha continued watching Rebecca and Ashley, noting their simple, somewhat worn clothes. When Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell moved away to get some items, the shopkeeper approached Rebecca. "You're new here in the neighborhood, right?" asked Mrs. Martha. "Yes, ma'am," Rebecca answered timidly. "And how do you know Dorothy?" the woman continued. She helped us in a difficult situation, said Rebecca, not wanting to give details. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell returned with her arms full of groceries and noticed the awkward situation. Martha, can you ring everything up? There's rice, beans, milk, eggs, meat for lunch, she said, placing the items on the counter. My Dorothy, so much food. Are you having a party? Commented Mrs. Martha as she rang up the items. Something like that, replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell curtly. On the way back, Ashley asked, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, you're spending a lot of money on us. How are we going to pay? The girl was worried. Children shouldn't worry about such things, said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell affectionately. But I'm not a child anymore, insisted Ashley. I know my mother doesn't have money to pay for things. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell stopped and crouched down to be at the girl's eye level. Listen carefully, Ashley. Sometimes in life we receive help when we need it most, and sometimes we can help when someone else needs it. Now it's your turn to receive help, okay? She explained patiently. But why are you helping us? You don't even know us, asked the girl with that unsettling maturity. Mrs. Dorothy fell silent for a moment, thinking of her answer. Because you remind me that there is still kindness in this world. Your mother is taking care of 4 children alone, and you love each other very much. That's rare these days, she said, touching the girl's face. Ashley spontaneously hugged Mrs. Dorothy, surprising them both. When they got home, they found the other children still playing in the yard under Rebecca's watchful eye. Timmy had managed to get one of the chickens to eat corn from his hand and was beaming with happiness. Look, Mummy, the chicken likes me, shouted the boy, running to show his mother. I see, sweetheart. That's so cool, replied Rebecca, smiling genuinely for the first time in a long while. Mrs. Dorothy watched the scene with a warmed heart. It had been years since her house had seen so much life and joy. That night during dinner, the children were more relaxed and chatted animatedly about their day. Emma said she had found an empty bird's nest in one of the trees, and Lily said she wanted to learn to care for plants like Mrs. Dorothy. You can stay here as long as you need, said Mrs. Dorothy suddenly, surprising everyone. Rebecca almost choked on her food. What do you mean, ma'am? She asked. You can stay here while you get back on your feet. There's space, there's food, and the children seem happy, explained Mrs. Dorothy. That's very generous, but we can't accept. We have no way to pay, protested Rebecca. Who said anything about paying? Asked Mrs. Dorothy. You can help around the house with the yard. I haven't had the energy to take care of everything by myself for a long time. Ashley looked hopefully at her mother, as did the other children. It had been a long time since they'd had a place to call home. I don't know what to say, murmured Rebecca, moved. You don't need to say anything right now. Think it over carefully, said Mrs. Dorothy. That night Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Mrs. Dorothy's offer. It was too good to be true. No one did something like that for strangers without wanting anything in return. The next morning, while preparing coffee, Rebecca talked to Mrs. Dorothy about her concerns. Mrs. Dorothy, I accept your offer, but with a few conditions, she said. What conditions? Asked the widow, curious. First, I want to help with all the household expenses as soon as I get a job. Second, I'll do all the cleaning and cook for everyone. And third, if you get tired of us or change your mind, just say the word, and we'll leave without any trouble, explained Rebecca. Mrs. Dorothy smiled. I accept the second condition. The first one we'll see about in time. The third one is out of the question, she said. Why out of the question? Asked Rebecca. Because no one is leaving here on my whim. If you leave, it will be because you want to, explained Mrs. Dorothy firmly. Rebecca felt a sense of security she hadn't experienced in years. She had finally found someone who offered stability for her children. In the following days, they established a routine. Rebecca took care of the house and cooked, while Mrs. Dorothy helped the children with their homework and taught them small household chores. The problem arose the first time Mrs. Dorothy went out to go to the bank. When she returned, she found Mr. Walter talking to Rebecca at the gate. So you're Dorothy's new tenant, said the neighbor, clearly investigating. Not exactly, sir, replied Rebecca, embarrassed. Walter, called Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, approaching. What are you doing here? Hi, Dorothy, I was getting to know your friend. I heard she has children too, said the man, smiling falsely. So what? Asked Mrs. Dorothy dryly. Nothing, I just find it interesting. You've always lived so quietly here, and now suddenly a whole family appears, commented Mr. Walter. Mrs. Dorothy felt she needed to be more direct. Walter, Rebecca and the children are going through a hard time and I'm helping. That's it. Anything else? She said, making it clear the conversation was over. No, I just thought it was nice of you to be doing charity work, replied the neighbor, but his tone made it clear there were ulterior motives. After Mr. Walter left, Rebecca turned to Mrs. Dorothy. I think we shouldn't have accepted your offer. We're causing trouble, she said, worried. You're not causing any trouble. Walter is just a gossip, reassured Mrs. Dorothy. But she knew that from that moment on, the whole neighborhood would have their eyes on her house. And not all reactions would be positive. The following week, Mrs. Margaret, the neighbor from across the street, knocked on Mrs. Dorothy's door. She was a 50-year-old married woman who always considered herself the neighborhood's moral watchdog. Dorothy, I need to talk to you, she said with a serious tone. Come in, Margaret. Would you like some coffee? Offered Mrs. Dorothy, trying to maintain cordiality. No, thank you. I came here as a friend to give you some advice, said Mrs. Margaret sitting in the living room. Rebecca was in the kitchen with the children, but the conversation was audible. Dorothy, everyone in the neighborhood is talking about this family you've taken in. We know nothing about these people, began Mrs. Margaret. And what's the problem? Asked Mrs. Dorothy, already foreseeing where this was going. The problem is you're being very naive. Desperate people are capable of anything, and this woman has 4 children, Dorothy. 4. Have you stopped to think about the responsibility you're taking on? Said Mrs. Margaret, raising her voice. They are honest people going through hard times, defended Mrs. Dorothy. How can you be sure? Do you know this woman's past? Do you know why she has 4 children from different fathers? Attacked Mrs. Margaret, not realizing Rebecca could hear everything. In the kitchen, Rebecca felt the words like stab wounds. Ashley held her mother's hand, sensing her sadness. Margaret, I think you'd better leave, said Mrs. Dorothy, standing up. Dorothy, I'm trying to protect you. This situation could bring serious problems. And another thing, have you thought about what will happen when they don't want to leave anymore? Insisted Mrs. Margaret. Out of my house, Margaret, now, ordered Mrs. Dorothy, opening the door. After the neighbor left, Mrs. Dorothy went to the kitchen to find Rebecca crying silently, with the children around her trying to console her. Rebecca, don't pay any mind to what that woman said, tried Mrs. Dorothy. She's right, Mrs. Dorothy. I'm a woman with 4 children, no husband, no family, no money. I'm exactly the kind of person people are afraid to help, said Rebecca through tears. That's not true, protested Mrs. Dorothy. Yes, it is, and you'll see it won't be just Mrs. Margaret. Everyone will speak ill of you because of us, continued Rebecca. Ashley, who had heard everything, turned to Mrs. Dorothy. Are you going to send us away? She asked in a small voice. Mrs. Dorothy knelt and hugged the 4 children. No one is leaving here. And if anyone doesn't like it, that's their problem, not ours, she said firmly. But that night, Mrs. Dorothy lay awake thinking about Mrs. Margaret's words. Was she really being naive? Did she really not know that family? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the following days, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell began to notice different looks from the neighbors when she left the house. Some greeted her coldly, others simply pretended not to see her. The feeling was uncomfortable, but she was determined not to let it shake her. It was on a Thursday afternoon that the situation became complicated for good. Mrs. Dorothy had gone out to pay some bills downtown, leaving Rebecca in charge of the house with the children. When she returned, she found 3 neighbor women at her doorstep, talking to Rebecca in an aggressive tone. What's going on here? Asked Mrs. Dorothy, approaching. Dorothy, good that you're here, said Mrs. Linda, a neighbor who lived 3 houses down. We were talking with your guest. About what? Asked Mrs. Dorothy, noticing Rebecca's embarrassment. About the problems you're causing in the neighborhood, said Mrs. Carroll, another neighbor. Since these people arrived, beggars have started appearing on our street. What beggars? Asked Mrs. Dorothy, confused. Yesterday, a man showed up asking for food at Mrs. Sandra's house. And this morning, a woman knocked on Mrs. Teresa's door looking for work, explained Mrs. Linda. And what does that have to do with Rebecca and the children? Asked Mrs. Dorothy, indignant. Dorothy, you need to understand. People like that attract people like that. When word gets out that someone is giving shelter, others come looking, said Mrs. Carroll. Rebecca, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. I never told anyone I'm living here. And I don't know any beggars, she said firmly. We're not accusing anyone, said Mrs. Linda, but her tone made it clear that was exactly what she was doing. We're just concerned about the neighborhood's safety. The neighborhood's safety isn't at risk because of a hard-working family, defended Mrs. Dorothy. Hard-working? Dorothy, this woman doesn't even have a job, said Mrs. Carroll, not caring about Rebecca's presence. That's when Rebecca couldn't take it anymore. You're right, I don't have a job. I lost my job because my boss didn't like employees with children, but that doesn't make me less worthy than anyone here, she said, with tears in her eyes but her head held high. Rebecca, you don't need to justify yourself to them, said Mrs. Dorothy, holding the young woman's arm. Yes, I do, Mrs. Dorothy, because these people are making you pay for a kindness, replied Rebecca, turning to the neighbors. Do you want me to leave? Then say it, because I won't stay where I'm not welcome. It's not that, dear, said Mrs. Linda, trying to soften things. It's just that the situation is complicated. There's nothing complicated, interrupted Mrs. Dorothy. Rebecca and the children are here because I wanted them to be, and they will stay here because I want them to. If anyone has a problem with that, the problem is yours, not mine. The three neighbors looked at each other, clearly not expecting such a firm reaction from Mrs. Dorothy. Dorothy, you're isolating yourself from the community because of strangers, tried Mrs. Carroll one last time. If the community is made of people who have no compassion for those in difficulty, then maybe it's better I isolate myself, replied Mrs. Dorothy, going inside and closing the door. Inside the house, Rebecca broke down in tears. Mrs. Dorothy, I can't stand being a burden on people's lives anymore, she sobbed. You are not a burden, Rebecca, said Mrs. Dorothy, hugging her. Yes, I am. Everywhere I go, I only cause problems. First for Mrs. Patricia, now for you, continued Rebecca. The problem isn't you, the problem is the people who can't see beyond their own pettiness, said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell firmly. Ashley, who was listening from the living room, approached. Mommy, maybe it really is better if we leave, said the girl with that disturbing maturity. No, said Mrs. Dorothy categorically. No one is leaving. This is your home now. Understand? That night, after putting the children to bed, Mrs. Dorothy and Rebecca stayed up talking in the kitchen until late. Tell me about the children's fathers, Mrs. Dorothy requested gently. Rebecca sighed deeply before beginning to speak. Ashley is the daughter of my first boyfriend, Kevin. I was 17 when I got pregnant. He said he would take responsibility, but when Ashley was born, he disappeared. I never saw him again, began Rebecca. And the others? Asked Mrs. Dorothy. Emma is the daughter of Daniel, a man 10 years older than me. He promised to marry me, but when he found out I already had a daughter, he changed his mind. Said he didn't want to raise another man's child, continued Rebecca, pain in her voice. Mrs. Dorothy held Rebecca's hand, encouraging her to continue. Lily is the daughter of Stephen, who was married. He promised me he would leave his wife, but when he found out I was pregnant, he said he couldn't take on another child. He gave me money to take care of the situation. I couldn't do it, said Rebecca, sniffling. And Timmy? Asked Mrs. Dorothy softly. Timmy's father is Brian, the only one who really loved me, or at least I thought he did. We lived together for 2 years. He helped raise Ashley, Emma, and Lily as if they were his own. When Timmy was born, I thought I finally had a real family, recounted Rebecca. What happened? Asked Mrs. Dorothy, already imagining the answer. He started drinking, said he couldn't handle the pressure of supporting 4 children. One day he came home drunk and said he was leaving, that he was too young to be a father to 4 kids. He took everything of value and disappeared, finished Rebecca, wiping her tears. Mrs. Dorothy was silent for a few minutes, processing everything she had heard. "Rebecca, you were a victim of irresponsible men. That is not your fault," she said finally. "But people don't see it that way. They see a woman who had 4 children by different fathers and think I am—" Rebecca couldn't finish the sentence. "Think you are what?" asked Mrs. Dorothy. "An easy woman without character," whispered Rebecca. "That is a lie. You are a woman who believed in love 4 times and was deceived 4 times. That makes you courageous, not without character," said Mrs. Dorothy with conviction. Rebecca looked at Mrs. Dorothy as if seeing an angel. "Why are you so good to us?" she asked. "Because you have given me something I had lost a long time ago," replied Mrs. Dorothy. "What?" asked Rebecca, curious. "A purpose, a reason to wake up happy in the morning," confessed the widow. The following week, Mrs. Dorothy made an important decision. She went downtown to look for work for Rebecca. She visited various businesses, offices and stores, trying to find someone willing to give a chance to a mother of 4. The answer was always the same. "With 4 children, it's difficult. We don't have the structure for employees with large families. You understand our position." Frustrated, Mrs. Dorothy was heading home when she passed in front of a bakery with a "Help Wanted" counter-staff sign on the door. She decided to try one more time. "Good afternoon. I saw the job sign," she said to the bakery owner, Mr. Anthony. "For you?" he asked, curious. "No, for a friend of mine. A very responsible and hard-working person," explained Mrs. Dorothy. "Can she come here tomorrow morning to talk?" asked Mr. Anthony. "Yes, she can, but I need to let you know she has children," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, deciding to be honest from the start. "How many?" asked the man. "4, answered Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, expecting the usual negative reaction. Mr. Anthony was thoughtful for a moment. "4 children? Is she married?" he asked. "Yes, separated," lied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, thinking it would be better than explaining the real situation. "Well, if she's truly responsible, we can give it a try. I need someone who arrives early and is punctual. I'll pay minimum wage to start," said Mr. Anthony. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell almost jumped for joy. "She is very punctual and responsible. She will be very grateful for the opportunity," she said, shaking the man's hand. When she got home, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell found Rebecca helping Ashley with her math homework, while the other children played in the backyard. "Rebecca, I have news," announced Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell excitedly. "What news?" asked Rebecca, looking up from the notebook. "I got you a job interview," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Rebecca was silent for a few seconds, as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. "Really? Where?" she asked, her eyes shining. "At Mr. Anthony's bakery there on Main Street. He wants you to go there tomorrow morning," explained Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "But what about the children?" asked Rebecca, always worried. "The children will stay with me. Ashley and Emma will go to school, and Lily and Timmy will stay here in the backyard," explained Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Rebecca stood up and hugged Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell tightly. "How can I ever thank you for such kindness?" she asked, moved. "By getting this job and restarting your life," answered Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. That night, Rebecca tried on several combinations of clothes, wanting to make the best possible impression. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell helped, lending her a nice blouse and a pair of closed-toe shoes. "You look beautiful, Mom," said Ashley, seeing her mother all dressed up. "Thank you, my dear," answered Rebecca, kissing the girl's forehead. The next morning, Rebecca left early for the interview. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell was anxious, preparing breakfast for the children and trying to keep the normal routine. 2 hours later, Rebecca returned with a radiant face. "So?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell eagerly. "I got it. I start on Monday," shouted Rebecca, jumping for joy. The children ran from the living room and the backyard to hug their mother. It was the first good news they had received in a long time. "I'll work Monday through Saturday, from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. The salary isn't much, but it's a start," explained Rebecca. "It's a great start," agreed Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Over the weekend, they organized the entire household routine for this new reality. Rebecca would wake up at 5 in the morning to be at the bakery by 6. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell would take Ashley and Emma to school at 7 and would stay with Lily and Timmy until Rebecca returned. "Mrs. Dorothy, this is too much work for you," said Rebecca, concerned. "Nonsense. For years I haven't had anything to do with my time. Now I will, answered the widow. On Monday, Rebecca's first day of work was a success. Mr. Anthony was impressed with her dedication and the speed with which she learned the tasks. Rebecca came home excited and full of stories to tell. Mr. Anthony said if I keep it up, in 3 months he'll raise my salary, she told Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. How wonderful, celebrated the widow. But not everything was perfect. On Wednesday of the first week, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell was coming back from school with Lily and Timmy when she met Mrs. Margaret on the sidewalk. "Dorothy, I heard your protégé got a job," said the neighbor, but her tone was not congratulatory. "Yes, she did." "And so?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "Nothing. I just find it interesting how people can take advantage of others' kindness," said Mrs. Margaret, casting a glance at the children. "Take advantage how?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, feeling her irritation grow. "Dorothy, you're working as a free babysitter while she's out working. Don't you see you're being used?" said Mrs. Margaret. Lily and Timmy, even though they were small, sensed the tension in the conversation and clung to Mrs. Dorothy's legs. "Margaret, I'm taking care of the children because I want to." "No one is forcing me," replied Mrs. Dorothy. "You want to now. But you'll see, this will become a routine and you'll end up being this family's unpaid housekeeper," insisted Mrs. Margaret. "Enough, Margaret. I don't want to talk about this anymore," said Mrs. Dorothy, taking the children by the hand and heading home. But the neighbor's words kept echoing in Mrs. Dorothy's head for the rest of the day. Was she really being naive? Was Rebecca taking advantage of her goodwill? When Rebecca got home from work, she noticed Mrs. Dorothy was quieter than usual. "Did something happen today?" she asked. "No, nothing major," replied Mrs. Dorothy, but Rebecca could tell something was wrong. That night, after putting the children to bed, Rebecca brought up the subject again. "Mrs. Dorothy, I know something is bothering you. You've always been very open with me," said Rebecca. Mrs. Dorothy hesitated, but decided to be honest. "Mrs. Margaret made some comments today. Said you were taking advantage of me," she told her. Rebecca felt as if she'd been slapped in the face. "And do you think it's true?" she asked, her voice choked. "I don't know what to think, Rebecca. Sometimes I get confused," confessed Mrs. Dorothy. Rebecca got up from her chair and started pacing the kitchen. "Mrs. Dorothy, if you think I'm taking advantage, maybe I should just leave," she said, tears in her eyes. "That's not it, Rebecca," Mrs. Dorothy tried. "Yes, it is. And maybe Mrs. Margaret is right. Maybe I really am taking advantage of your kindness," said Rebecca, feeling guilty. "Rebecca, sit here," asked Mrs. Dorothy, pointing to the chair beside hers. "Do you want to know the truth?" "I do," replied Rebecca, wiping her tears. "The truth is, before you all came here, I was dying of sadness and loneliness. I had no reason to tidy the house, to cook, to tend the yard. You gave me life again," confessed Mrs. Dorothy. "But that doesn't change the fact that you're working to take care of my children," insisted Rebecca. "I'm not working, Rebecca, I'm living. There's a huge difference between the two things," explained Mrs. Dorothy. Rebecca looked deeply into Mrs. Dorothy's eyes and saw total sincerity. "Then why were you confused by Mrs. Margaret's comments?" she asked. "Because sometimes you hear something so many times you start to doubt your own certainties," replied Mrs. Dorothy. "But now I'm sure again." "Sure of what?" asked Rebecca. "That you are the family I always wanted to have," said Mrs. Dorothy, moved. The two women embraced, and Rebecca felt she had finally found not just a house, but a real home. In the following weeks, the family's life began to stabilize. Rebecca excelled at work, and Mr. Anthony kept his promise to raise her salary. The children adapted to the new routine and were visibly happier and more secure. Ashley, who always carried the burden of being the oldest child, began to act more like a 12-year-old. She played more, smiled more, and even started making friends at school. Emma discovered she liked drawing and spent hours making illustrations to give to Mrs. Dorothy. Lily became especially attached to the backyard chickens and asked every day to help take care of them. Timmy, the youngest, called Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell Grandma and would cling to her whenever he could. But the tranquility didn't last long. One day, when Rebecca was at work and the children at school, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell received an unexpected visitor. It was an elegant woman, about 40 years old, who introduced herself as a social worker. "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Sandra Williams from Child Protective Services. We received a report about children in an irregular situation at this address," said the woman, showing an identification badge. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell felt her heart race. "What kind of report?" she asked, trying to stay calm. "We were informed that a woman without proper documentation is keeping 4 children in inadequate conditions," explained Sandra. "That's not true. The children are very well cared for," defended Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "May I come in to verify the conditions of the house?" asked the social worker. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell couldn't refuse without seeming suspicious. She allowed Sandra to enter and conduct the inspection. The woman examined every room, noting everything on a clipboard. "The house is clean and organized," Sandra admitted, "but I need to verify the documentation for the children and the legal guardian." "The legal guardian is at work right now. She returns at 2 in the afternoon," informed Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "And you, what is your relationship to the children?" asked Sandra. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell hesitated. How to explain the situation without it seeming irregular? "I'm a family friend who is helping out temporarily," she said. "I see. I'll return at 2:30 to speak with the children's mother. I need to see birth certificates, school enrollment proof, and other documents," explained Sandra. After the social worker left, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell grew nervous. She called the bakery and asked to speak to Rebecca urgently. "Rebecca, I need you to come home now. We have a serious problem," she said over the phone. Rebecca managed to leave work early and arrived home distressed. "What happened, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell?" she asked. "A social worker came here. Someone made a report about you all," told Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Rebecca felt her legs go weak. "What kind of report?" she asked, sitting down so she wouldn't fall. "She said you are in an irregular situation," explained Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "And we are," murmured Rebecca. "I don't have documented legal custody of the children. I don't have proof of a fixed address." "What do you mean you don't have legal custody?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, confused. "Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, when a single woman has children, she automatically has custody. But if she doesn't have a steady job, a home of her own, proven income, that custody can be questioned," explained Rebecca. "And now? What are we going to do?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, anguished. "We'll gather all the documents I have and hope it's enough," said Rebecca, but she was visibly worried. They spent the afternoon organizing all the papers, the children's birth certificates, Rebecca's work card, school enrollment proof, but they didn't have proof of a fixed address since Rebecca was living there as a favor. At 2:30 sharp, Sandra returned. This time she brought a male colleague, who introduced himself as Dr. Richard, the service supervisor. "Good afternoon, I'm Rebecca, the children's mother," said Rebecca, trying to maintain her composure. "Good afternoon, Rebecca. I need to ask some questions and verify the documentation," said Sandra, sitting at the kitchen table. "Where did you live before coming here?" asked Dr. Richard. Rebecca told the whole story: the housekeeping work, the dismissal, the eviction, the flood. "And how long have you been living here?" asked Sandra. "For about 2 months," replied Rebecca. "Do you have any document that proves a fixed address?" asked Dr. Kevin. "No, because I don't rent the house. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell offered me temporary housing," explained Rebecca. The 2 social workers exchanged glances. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you have any document formalizing this arrangement? A loan for use agreement, for example?" asked Sandra. "No, it was a verbal agreement," replied Mrs. Dorothy. "I see. And what is the time frame for this temporary housing?" insisted Dr. Richard. "There's no time frame. They can stay as long as they need," said Mrs. Dorothy. "That is not acceptable from a documentation standpoint," said Dr. Richard. "From a legal perspective, these children are in irregular housing conditions." "But they are well cared for, fed, going to school," protested Mrs. Dorothy. "We're not questioning that, ma'am. The house is well organized and the children appear healthy. But the law requires minors to have documented fixed residence," explained Sandra. "What does that mean?" asked Rebecca, afraid of the answer. "It means you have 30 days to regularize the situation. Either you secure your own housing with a rental contract, or we formalize the current situation with proper documentation," said Dr. Richard. And if we can't? Asked Rebecca, already knowing the answer. The children will have to be placed in temporary shelters until the situation is regularized. Sandra replied with regret. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Mrs. Dorothy felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her feet. Can't there be some solution? She asked. The quickest solution would be for you to formalize the transfer of use for a room in your house through a document registered with a notary. That would give Rebecca a valid proof of residence, explained Dr. Richard. Then let's do that, said Mrs. Dorothy immediately. It's not that simple, said Sandra. We would have to verify if you have the legal and financial capacity to take on this responsibility. It's a process that can take time. How long? Asked Rebecca, distressed. 2 to 3 months, replied Dr. Richard. But you said we only have 30 days, reminded Mrs. Dorothy. Exactly. That's why the situation is complicated, confirmed Sandra. After the social workers left, Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy remained silent for a long time. Mrs. Dorothy, I think it's really time for me to leave, said Rebecca finally. To where? Asked Mrs. Dorothy. I don't know, but I can't let them take my children because of my situation, replied Rebecca, crying. They are not going to take your daughters. We will find a solution, said Mrs. Dorothy with determination. What solution? I don't have money to rent a house. I don't have a guarantor. I have nothing, Rebecca vented. At that moment, the children arrived from school and immediately sensed something was wrong. What happened? Asked Ashley, always attentive. Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy tried to hide it, but the tension was evident. Nothing serious, sweetie. Just some grown-up problems, said Rebecca, forcing a smile. But Ashley wasn't convinced. That night, after the other children went to sleep, she talked to her mother. Mum, is someone going to separate us again? Asked the girl. Rebecca couldn't lie to her daughter. That is a possibility, my dear, she admitted with tears in her eyes. Is it because of the neighbors who don't like us? Asked Ashley. Partly, yes, confirmed Rebecca. Then let's leave before they force us out, suggested Ashley with that frightening maturity. To where, sweetie? We have nowhere to go, said Rebecca. Then we stay and fight, decided Ashley. Mrs. Dorothy is family now, and family doesn't abandon family. The next morning, Mrs. Dorothy made a decision. She went to the neighborhood notary's office to inquire about the documentation needed to formalize the housing for Rebecca and the children. Is it possible to make a loan-for-use contract for a family? She asked the clerk. Yes, it is possible. But it requires specific documentation and notarized signatures, the man explained. You also need to prove that you are capable of taking on this responsibility. What kind of proof? Asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Proof of income, a certificate of no outstanding debts, a character reference report, listed the clerk. How long does it take to be ready? She asked anxiously. If all the documents are correct, about 15 days, replied the man. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell left the notary's office more hopeful. 15 days was tight, but it was possible. When she got home, she found Rebecca preparing lunch with a heavy expression. I have news, announced Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Good or bad? Asked Rebecca. Good. We can make the contract in 15 days if we gather all the documentation, explained Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Rebecca hugged the widow, feeling a small hope being reborn. But the following week, another complication arose. Timmy, the youngest, began to show strange symptoms: high fever, headache, and loss of appetite. I think it's better to take him to the doctor, said Rebecca, worried. At the health clinic, the diagnosis was pneumonia. Timmy needed to be hospitalized immediately. Is he going to be okay? Asked Rebecca, desperate. Yes, he will, but he needs constant monitoring for the next few days, explained the doctor. Rebecca stayed at the hospital with Timmy, while Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell took care of the other 3 children. The situation was getting more and more complicated. Rebecca had to miss work, the hospital expenses increased, and the social worker's deadline kept ticking. Mr. Anthony is going to let me go if I keep missing work, said Rebecca over the hospital phone. Don't worry about that now. The important thing is for Timmy to get better, reassured Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. But she was very worried. Without Rebecca's salary, how would they pay the extra hospital expenses? That's when Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell made a difficult decision. She went to the bank and withdrew part of the savings she had set aside from her husband's pension. It was money she was saving for emergencies, and this was definitely an emergency. Timmy was hospitalized for 5 days. When he was finally discharged, he was weak but out of danger. Rebecca was exhausted from so much worry and sleepless nights. "How are we going to pay for all this?" asked Rebecca, looking at the hospital bills. "It's already paid," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "What do you mean?" asked Rebecca, confused. "I paid it, with my savings," explained Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "That's too much money. How will I pay you back?" protested Rebecca. "You don't need to pay it back. It's help from family to family," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "But," tried Rebecca. "No buts. Timmy is well, and that's what matters," cut off Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. When they arrived home, the 3 girls welcomed their brother with celebration. The house had been too quiet for over a week without the boy's cheerful presence. "Timmy!" they all shouted at once, running to hug him. "Careful, he's still a little weak," warned Rebecca. "Can I play with the chickens, Grandma?" Timmy asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, using the affectionate nickname. "Yes, you can, my dear. They missed you," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, melting at the grandma. But the joy was short-lived. The next day, when Rebecca returned to work, Mr. Anthony called her for a talk. "Rebecca, I need to speak with you," said the man with a serious expression. "I know I missed many days because of my sick son, but I promise it won't happen again," said Rebecca, trying to justify herself. "It's not just that, Rebecca," said Mr. Anthony. "Some clients have made comments about your situation." "What kind of comments?" asked Rebecca, feeling her stomach turn to ice. "They say you're living as a guest, that you have 4 children, that you have no stability. They think this could affect your work here," explained the man, embarrassed. "But my work here has always been impeccable," defended Rebecca. "I know that. You are an exemplary employee, but I have a business to run and I can't lose customers," said Mr. Anthony. "Are you letting me go?" asked Rebecca, already knowing the answer. "Not exactly. I'm giving you 2 weeks to resolve your situation. If you can prove fixed housing and stability, you stay. Otherwise—" He didn't finish the sentence. Rebecca left the bakery in a daze. It was as if the world was conspiring against her. When she got home, she found Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell playing with the children in the backyard. "How was work?" asked Mrs. Dorothy, noticing Rebecca's downcast expression. "I need to talk to you," said Rebecca. They went to the kitchen, and Rebecca told her about the conversation with Mr. Anthony. 2 weeks, repeated Mrs. Dorothy. "Coincidentally, it's the same deadline we have to get the documentation in order." "This is no coincidence, Mrs. Dorothy. It's the same group of people putting pressure everywhere," said Rebecca bitterly. "What group of people?" asked Mrs. Dorothy. "The neighbors who don't want us here. They're speaking ill of me everywhere, trying to push me out of the only stability I've managed to get," explained Rebecca. Mrs. Dorothy felt a growing anger inside her. How could people be so cruel? "Rebecca, we will manage. We'll speed up the documentation process and show these people that you have as much right as anyone to live in peace," she said with determination. "And if we don't manage?" asked Rebecca. "We will manage," insisted Mrs. Dorothy, but inside she was as worried as Rebecca. That night, Ashley again demonstrated her premature maturity. "Mum, I know we're going through a hard time," said the girl. "How do you know that?" asked Rebecca. "Because I pay attention to the conversations, to the adults' expressions, to the way you whisper when you think we're not looking," explained Ashley. Rebecca sighed. It was impossible to hide anything from that girl. "It's true, my daughter. We are facing some difficulties," admitted Rebecca. "If needed, I'll stop studying and go to work to help," offered Ashley. "No," said Rebecca categorically. "You will not stop studying for anything in this world. Education is the only thing no one can take from you." "Then what can we do to help?" asked Ashley. Rebecca thought for a moment. "You can keep being the wonderful children you are, studying well in school and behaving. The rest is the adults' problem," said Rebecca. But Ashley wasn't convinced she couldn't do anything. At school, she talked to the teacher about the family's situation. "Ms. Jennifer, is there any program that helps families with housing problems?" she asked. "Why do you want to know, Ashley?" asked the teacher, sensing there was something behind the question. "It's for a research project," lied Ashley. "Yes, there are some social programs, but they usually have very long waiting lists," explained the teacher. "Why don't you talk to your parents about this?" "I will talk to them," said Ashley, but she already knew she wouldn't. She didn't want to worry her mother even more. When she got home, Ashley found Mrs. Dorothy alone in the kitchen, shuffling some papers. "Grandma Dorothy, can I talk to you?" she asked, using the affectionate nickname all the children had adopted. "Of course, my dear. Sit here," said Mrs. Dorothy, making space at the table. "I know you're worried about our situation," said Ashley directly. "Ashley," tried Mrs. Dorothy, "Grandma, I know I'm a child, but I understand things." "And I want to help," interrupted Ashley. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell looked at that 12-year-old girl with admiration. Ashley had a strength and determination that many adults lacked. "What do you want to know?" asked Mrs. Dorothy, deciding to be honest. "What our real problems are and what the possible solutions are," said Ashley, as if she were an adult discussing a business plan. Mrs. Dorothy explained the whole situation: the documentation issue, the deadline from the social workers, the pressure on Rebecca's job, and the neighbors' campaign against the family. "I understand," said Ashley, processing all the information. "What if we got support from other people to counterbalance the pressure from the mean neighbors?" "How so?" asked Mrs. Dorothy. "At school, there are several mothers who like me and Emma. If they knew our real situation, maybe they'd support our family," suggested Ashley. Mrs. Dorothy was impressed with the girl's strategy. "That might actually work," she said thoughtfully. "So can I try?" asked Ashley excitedly. "You can, but carefully. Don't tell everything to everyone, only to people you really trust," advised Mrs. Dorothy. The next day, Ashley put the plan into action. She spoke with her best friend's mother at school, Mrs. Susan, a 50-year-old woman who had always been kind to her. "Mrs. Susan, can I talk to you about something?" asked Ashley. "Of course, dear. What is it?" asked the woman. "My family is going through a hard time and some people are trying to hurt us." "Do you know my mother?" asked Ashley. "Yes, I do. She has always been very polite at school meetings," replied Mrs. Susan. Ashley briefly explained the family's situation, making it clear they weren't asking for financial help, just understanding and moral support. "My dear, what a sad situation," said Mrs. Susan, genuinely moved. "Your mother is doing heroic work raising you four alone." "Do you think other mothers at school would think so too?" asked Ashley. "I'm sure they would. I'll talk to some friends," promised Mrs. Susan. Within a few days, the true version of the family's story began to circulate among the school mothers. Unlike the distorted version the mean neighbors were spreading, this version showed Rebecca as a hard-working and dedicated mother who was facing temporary difficulties. The result was surprising. Several mothers sought out Ashley and Emma to express support and admiration. Some even offered practical help, like giving the girls a ride home when Rebecca was working or watching the children in an emergency. "Ashley, you are a very smart girl," said Mrs. Deborah, a classmate's mother. "Your family is an example of unity and determination." When Ashley told Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy about the support she was receiving at school, the two women were moved. "My daughter, you're amazing," said Rebecca, hugging the girl. "I just used the same strategy the mean neighbors used, but with the truth," explained Ashley. The support from the school mothers began to reflect in other aspects of the family's life. When Mr. Anthony saw some customers praising Rebecca and criticizing those who were spreading mean gossip, he reconsidered his position. "Rebecca, I spoke with some customers and they said you are a hard-working and honest person," said Mr. Anthony. "I think I was hasty in giving that ultimatum." "You mean that?" began Rebecca. "I mean you can keep working here. Regardless of your personal situation, you are a good employee," said the man. Rebecca nearly broke down in tears of relief. "Thank you, Mr. Anthony. You won't regret it," she promised. Meanwhile, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell was running after all the necessary documentation to formalize the family's housing. She discovered the process was more complicated than she had imagined, but she was determined to succeed. "I need a certificate of good conduct, a certificate of no debts, proof of income for the last 3 months, and a home inspection report," she listed for Rebecca. "This is so bureaucratic," said Rebecca, discouraged. "It is bureaucratic, but it's possible." "Let's divide the tasks to speed up the process," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. They spent the following week chasing the documents. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell went to the notary, the bank, the city hall. Rebecca managed to get time off from work to help with some papers. The children stayed with Mrs. Susan and other school mothers who offered to help. Finally, on the 10th day after the social worker's visit, they managed to gather all the necessary documentation. "Now we just need to file it and wait for approval," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, exhausted but relieved. "How long does it take?" asked Rebecca. "They said up to 5 business days," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. They were racing against time. There were only 10 days left until the social worker's final deadline. That weekend, something happened that completely changed the dynamics of the situation. Mrs. Margaret, the neighbor who had always criticized the family's presence, appeared at Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell's door with a different expression. "Dorothy, can I talk to you?" she asked without her usual arrogant tone. "Come in, Margaret," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, curious about the change in attitude. They sat in the living room, and Mrs. Margaret was silent for a few moments before speaking. "Dorothy, I came to apologize," she finally said. "Apologize for what?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, surprised. "For everything I said about Rebecca and the children, for trying to convince you that you were being used," explained Mrs. Margaret. "What made you change your mind?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "My youngest daughter, who studies at the same school as the girls, came home telling me the family's real story. How the mother works hard, how the children are polite and studious, how you all help each other," recounted Mrs. Margaret. "And?" encouraged Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "And I realized I was being prejudiced and cruel. That woman is doing exactly what I would do if I were in her situation, fighting for her children," admitted Mrs. Margaret with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell was moved by her neighbor's sincerity. "Margaret, thank you for coming to talk to me," she said. "Dorothy, there's one more thing," said Mrs. Margaret. "I was one of the people who called Child Protective Services to make the report." Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell felt a shock. Although she suspected a neighbor had made the report, hearing the confirmation still hurt. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I want to help reverse the situation. I'll call Child Protective Services and say the report was a misunderstanding, that the family is well structured," proposed Mrs. Margaret. "You would do that?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, incredulous. "I would. It's the least I can do to repair the harm I caused," replied Mrs. Margaret. When Rebecca arrived from work that afternoon, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell told her about the visit and Mrs. Margaret's proposal. "She really said she'll call the social workers?" asked Rebecca, still processing the information. "Yes, she did. And she seemed sincere," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "I don't know if I should believe it, after everything she did," said Rebecca, suspicious. "I understand your suspicion, but I think people can change when they realize they were wrong," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. The next day, Mrs. Margaret kept her promise. She called Sandra, the social worker, and explained that she had made the report based on incorrect information and personal prejudice. "So you wish to withdraw the report?" asked Sandra. "Yes. The family is very well cared for and structured. It was my mistake," admitted Mrs. Margaret. "I understand. But that doesn't eliminate the need for document regularization. We'll keep monitoring until everything is in order," informed Sandra. Mrs. Margaret called Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell to tell her about the conversation. She said that even with the withdrawal of the complaint, you still need to regularize the documentation, she informed. "All right, we're already taking care of that," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. The following week, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell received the call she was waiting for. The documentation had been approved, and the loan agreement was ready for signing. "Rebecca!" shouted Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, hanging up the phone. "We did it!" Rebecca came running from the kitchen. "Did what?" she asked. "The documentation was approved. We can sign the contract tomorrow," announced Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, beaming. The two women hugged, and the children who were playing in the backyard ran to see what was happening. "Does this mean we get to stay here forever?" asked Lily. "It means we now have documents that prove this is our home too," explained Rebecca. "Are we a real family now?" asked Timmy. "We've always been a real family, my love. Now we just have the papers that confirm it," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, picking up the boy. The next day, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, Rebecca, and Ashley, who insisted on coming along, went to the notary's office to sign the contract. It was a historic moment for the family. "Rebecca Carson, do you accept the loan agreement offered by Dorothy Mitchell for residence at the address?" asked the notary. "I accept," replied Rebecca, signing the document with hands trembling with emotion. When they left the notary's office with the registered contract, Ashley said, "Now, no one can say we don't have a fixed address anymore," she said with satisfaction. "That's right, my dear. Now you have a real home," confirmed Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. The following week, Sandra returned for a final inspection. This time, she came only to confirm everything was regularized. "Congratulations, Rebecca. You managed to resolve everything within the deadline," said the social worker. "We didn't do it alone. We had help from many good people," replied Rebecca, looking affectionately at Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "That's what I like to see, community helping each other. Your case is officially closed," announced Sandra. When Sandra left, the family could finally relax. After months of uncertainty and struggle, they finally had security and stability. That night, they had a small celebration in the backyard. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell prepared the children's favorite dish, and Rebecca made a simple cake. The girls decorated the backyard with flowers from the garden, and Timmy fed the chickens wearing his Sunday best. "Grandma Dorothy, thank you for saving us," said Lily, hugging the widow. "You saved me, my dear. You brought life and joy to this house," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, moved. "Now we are a family of 6, said Emma. 7, corrected Timmy. "The 3 chickens count too." Everyone laughed, and Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell thought about how her life had completely changed in just a few months. From a lonely widow without purpose, she had become a grandmother to 4 wonderful children and gained a daughter in Rebecca. But life still had some surprises in store for the family. A few weeks later, when things were finally calm, Ashley came home from school with important news. "Mom, Grandma, I have some news to share," said the girl, visibly excited. "What news?" asked Rebecca. "I was chosen to represent the school in the municipal essay contest," announced Ashley. "My daughter, I'm so proud," said Rebecca, hugging the girl. "What's the topic?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "Family, different forms of love," answered Ashley. "And I already know exactly what I'm going to write." "What?" asked Rebecca, curious. "About our family. About how true love doesn't depend on blood but on choice," explained Ashley. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell felt her eyes fill with tears. That girl always surprised her with her wisdom. Ashley spent the following weeks working on the essay with the help of Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, who discovered she had a talent for proofreading. Together they created a moving text about second chances, generosity, and love's ability to transform lives. On the day of the contest, the whole family accompanied Ashley to the City Hall where the presentation would take place. Rebecca managed to get time off work, and even Mrs. Margaret showed up to cheer for the girl. "Ashley, whatever the result, we are already proud of you," said Rebecca before the presentation. "I know, Mum, but I want to win to show everyone that our family is special," replied Ashley. The presentation was moving. Ashley read her essay with a firm and clear voice, telling the story of a lonely widow who found purpose by helping a family in need, and of a courageous mother who never gave up fighting for her children. When Ashley finished reading, there were tears in the eyes of many people in the audience. The story had touched not only the judges, but the entire community present. A week later, the result came out. Ashley had won first place in the municipal essay contest. The award included a scholarship to a renowned private school in the city. "I won! I won!" shouted Ashley, running to hug her family when she learned the result. "My daughter, you are amazing," said Rebecca, crying with emotion. "Ashley, your essay was the most touching I've read in years of teaching," said the school principal. "You have a very special family." Ashley's victory in the contest brought even more positive recognition to the family. The local newspaper ran a story about the winning essay, and many people in the city learned the family's real story. "Look, Mom, our picture in the paper," said Lily, showing the publication. Unconventional family teaches lessons of love and solidarity. Read Emma the article's headline. Now everyone will know we are a real family, said Timmy proudly. The repercussion of the article was surprising. Several families in the city got in touch to express admiration and support. Some even shared similar stories of overcoming adversity and forming unconventional families. You have become an example for many people, said Mrs. Susan, the school mother who first supported the family. It's strange to think our story can inspire other people, said Rebecca. It's not strange, it's beautiful, replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. It shows that love always wins over prejudice. But perhaps the greatest transformation happened within the neighborhood itself. Mrs. Margaret became one of the family's biggest defenders, and other neighbors who were once indifferent began to show support and affection. Dorothy, I have to admit your house is much happier since the family arrived, said Mr. Walter, who used to be the most critical. It's true, Walter. The children brought life to the neighborhood, agreed Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. And Rebecca is a hard-working and honest young woman. We were wrong about her, admitted the neighbor. Months later, when the family's situation was completely stable, something happened that no one expected. Rebecca received a phone call that would once again change the course of their lives. Hello, I'd like to speak with Rebecca Carson, said an unknown male voice. Speaking, replied Rebecca, suspicious. My name is Dr. Henry, I'm a lawyer. I'm calling on behalf of Mrs. Deborah Albuquerque, your former employer, explained the man. Rebecca's heart raced. Why would the woman who had fired her be looking for a lawyer to speak with her? What does she want? Asked Rebecca, worried. She would like to meet with you in person. She has a proposal to make, said the lawyer. What kind of proposal? Insisted Rebecca. I'd prefer she explain it herself. Could you come to the office tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon? Asked Dr. Henry. Rebecca was confused and apprehensive. She talked with Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell about the phone call, and both were intrigued. Could she want to sue you for something? Asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, concerned. I don't know. I can't imagine what she wants with me after all this time, replied Rebecca. Are you going to meet with her? Asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. I think so. I need to know what she wants, decided Rebecca. The next day, Rebecca got ready and went to the lawyer's office. She was nervous but curious to find out what Mrs. Patricia wanted with her. In the office, she found her former boss sitting in an elegant armchair. Mrs. Patricia looked different, thinner, with a tired expression Rebecca didn't remember seeing before. Hi, Rebecca, thank you for coming, said Mrs. Patricia, standing up. Mrs. Patricia, Rebecca greeted coldly. What do you want with me? First of all, I want to apologize, said Mrs. Patricia, surprising Rebecca. Apologize for what? Asked Rebecca, suspicious. For everything. For firing you unfairly. For not giving references. For being cruel when you most needed help, explained Mrs. Patricia, her voice choked. Rebecca fell silent, not knowing how to react. Why are you apologizing to me now? She finally asked. Because I read the article in the newspaper about your family, about your story of overcoming adversity, explained Mrs. Patricia, and I realized how unfair I was to you. And, asked Rebecca, still suspicious, and because I'm going through a situation similar to what you went through, admitted Mrs. Patricia. How so? Asked Rebecca, curious despite herself. My husband left me 6 months ago. I found out he'd been having an affair for years. He took almost all the money and left me with huge debts, recounted Mrs. Patricia, with tears in her eyes. Rebecca was surprised. She never imagined the woman who seemed to have a perfect life was facing such serious problems. I'm sorry to hear that, said Rebecca, and she truly meant it. Rebecca, when I fired you, I said I didn't trust women who hid having children. Now I understand why you didn't tell. You knew you would be judged and discriminated against, continued Mrs. Patricia. That's true, confirmed Rebecca. I want to make a deal with you, said Mrs. Patricia. What kind of deal? Asked Rebecca, intrigued. I want you to come back to work for me. With a formal contract, fair salary, and all your children can stay at the house when you need, proposed Mrs. Patricia. Rebecca was shocked. It was the last thing she expected to hear. Why would you do that? She asked. Because you were the best employee I ever had, because I was unfair to you, and because now I know what it's like to be a woman alone fighting to survive, explained Mrs. Patricia. "I need to think about this," said Rebecca. "Of course. But no, the offer is serious, and it comes with a sincere request for forgiveness," said Mrs. Patricia. When she got home, Rebecca told everything to Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell and the children. "She really apologized?" asked Ashley, incredulous. "She did, and she offered a job much better than the one I have now," confirmed Rebecca. "And are you going to accept?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "I don't know. After everything she put me through," said Rebecca, undecided. "Mom, sometimes people change when they go through difficult situations," said Ashley, with her peculiar wisdom. "It's true. Mrs. Margaret changed. Other neighbors changed. Maybe Mrs. Patricia can change too," agreed Emma. "But would you like to work for her again?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "I'd like to have a better job, that's for sure. And if she really has changed, maybe it's an opportunity," reflected Rebecca. After talking with the family and thinking for a few days, Rebecca decided to accept the proposal, but with conditions. She returned to the lawyer's office to give her answer. "Mrs. Patricia, I accept your proposal, but with a few conditions," said Rebecca. "What conditions?" asked Mrs. Patricia. "First, I want a formal work contract and all labor rights. Second, if at any point you start treating me poorly again or discriminating against me for having children, I leave immediately. Third, I want total respect for my family," listed Rebecca. "I accept all the conditions," said Mrs. Patricia without hesitation. "There's one more thing," said Rebecca. "What?" asked Mrs. Patricia. "I want to keep living with Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. She's not just my landlady, she's my family," said Rebecca firmly. "Of course, that's not even up for discussion," agreed Mrs. Patricia. Rebecca's new job was an incredible transformation for the family. The salary was almost 3 times what she earned at the bakery, with benefits and stability. For the first time in her life, she had real financial security. "Mom, now you can buy that pretty dress you saw at the store," said Lily, excited. "And we can help Grandma Dorothy with the house expenses," said Ashley, always practical. "That's right. Now we are a family that helps each other," agreed Rebecca. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell was moved when Rebecca insisted on contributing significantly to the household expenses. "Rebecca, you don't need to pay so much," she protested. "Yes, I do. We're a family, and family shares responsibilities," insisted Rebecca. Months later, the family's life had completely transformed. Rebecca was professionally established, the children were doing well in school, and Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell had found the purpose she had been seeking for years. Ashley continued to excel academically and won 2 more essay contests. Emma discovered a talent for art and began selling her drawings at the local fair. Lily became the official caretaker of the chickens and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Timmy grew strong and healthy, always smiling and filling the house with joy. "Looking back, it's hard to believe everything we went through," said Rebecca one night, when they were all gathered in the backyard. "And everything we achieved," added Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "Grandma, tell us what your life was like before we arrived," asked Lily. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell smiled sadly. "It was very empty, my dear. I would wake up in the morning not knowing why I was waking up," she told. "And now?" asked Timmy. "Now I wake up eager to see what mischief you'll all get up to during the day," answered Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, laughing. "And you, Mom? How do you feel?" Emma asked Rebecca. "For the first time in my life, I feel complete. I have a dignified job, a real home, and a family that loves me," answered Rebecca, moved. "We were always a family," said Ashley. "We just needed to find our home." "That's true," agreed Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "You found a home and I found a family." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. It was Mrs. Margaret, who now visited the family regularly. "Hi, everyone, I brought you a cake," she said, entering the backyard. "Mrs. Margaret, you didn't have to," said Rebecca. "Yes, I did. You taught me that being a real neighbor is this, taking care of each other," answered Mrs. Margaret. As they cut the cake and talked, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell looked around and saw her house full of life, laughter, and love. She thought of Harold, her late husband, and was sure he would be happy seeing how she had turned their dream of having a big, close-knit family into reality. "What are you thinking about, Grandma?" asked Timmy. noticing Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell's contemplative expression. "I'm thinking that sometimes the best things in life come when we least expect them," she replied, hugging the boy. "How so?" asked Lily. "Like you all. I never imagined that at my age I'd gain 4 grandchildren and a daughter," explained Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "And we never imagined we'd find such a wonderful grandmother," said Emma. "Or that we'd have a real house to call our own," completed Ashley. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell stayed talking in the kitchen, as they had grown accustomed to doing. "Dorothy, can I ask you a question?" said Rebecca. "Of course," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "Do you regret anything you did for us?" asked Rebecca. "Regret?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, surprised. "Why would I regret it? For all the complications we caused in your life, the problems with the neighbors, the extra expenses, the rush with the paperwork," listed Rebecca. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell grew thoughtful for a moment. "Rebecca, you want to know something? Before you all arrived, I was seriously thinking about selling this house and going to live in a retirement home," she confessed. "Really?" asked Rebecca, surprised. "Really. I felt like a burden on the world, without purpose, without a reason to keep fighting," explained Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "You saved me just as much as I saved you." "Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell," began Rebecca, moved. "No, let me finish," interrupted the widow. "You gave me the chance to be the mother and grandmother I always dreamed of being. You gave me children to care for, grandchildren to spoil, a family to love. If anyone is in debt here, it's me." The two women embraced, knowing they had found something rare and precious, a family built on true love. 1 year after the first night Rebecca and the children arrived as flood-displaced, the family decided to throw a party to celebrate the family anniversary, as Timmy nicknamed the date. 1 year, said Ashley, now 13 and even more mature. "It feels like a whole lifetime." "It was a whole lifetime," agreed Rebecca. "Our real life began that day." "No," corrected Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "Our real lives began when we decided to become a real family." For the party, they invited all the neighbors, including the school mothers who had supported the family, and even Mrs. Patricia, who had become a sincere friend after everything that happened. "Rebecca, your family is inspiring," said Mrs. Patricia during the party. "You taught me about second chances and forgiveness." "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mrs. Patricia." "Including you," replied Rebecca. "And me, do I deserve a third chance?" joked Mrs. Margaret, approaching the two. "Because with me, it took several chances until I learned." "Everyone deserves as many chances as necessary to learn," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, joining the group. The party lasted until late, with music, good food, and many stories. The children played with the neighbors' kids, and the adults talked about how life can change when we open our hearts to love and compassion. When everyone had left and the family was alone cleaning up the mess, Timmy asked a question that left everyone emotional. "Grandma, do you think my father will ever want to meet me?" asked the boy. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell knelt down to be at his level. "I don't know, my love, but if he comes he'll find a strong, smart boy loved by a whole family," she replied. "And if he doesn't come?" insisted Timmy. "If he doesn't come, you'll always have us and we'll always be your true family," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, hugging the boy. "It's true, son," agreed Rebecca. "Family isn't just who gives us life. Family is who chooses to stay with us." "Like Grandma Dorothy chose to stay with us," said Lily. "And how you chose to accept me as your grandma," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. That night, when everyone had finally gone to sleep, Mrs. Dorothy stayed alone in the kitchen for a few minutes, looking at the photos from the party that Emma had taken. In one of them, the whole family was gathered in the backyard, smiling. It was a picture of a happy family, complete and full of love. She thought about the journey that had brought them there, the challenges, the tears, the fears, but also the joys, the achievements, and the love that had grown among all of them. She thought about how a storm that seemed like a tragedy ended up being the blessing she needed most in her life. "Thank you, Harold," she whispered to her late husband, as she did every night. "Thank you for giving me the strength to do the right thing that first dawn." The next morning, life returned to its normal routine. Rebecca went to work, The children went to school, and Mrs. Dorothy stayed home taking care of the house. But it was a happy routine full of purpose and love. When the children returned from school, they had news. "Grandma!" shouted Emma, running into the backyard. "The teacher said my drawing is going to be displayed in the City Hall gallery." "How wonderful, my dear," celebrated Mrs. Dorothy. "And I was chosen to be the class speaker for the 8th grade graduation," announced Ashley. "You see," said Mrs. Dorothy, proudly. "My granddaughters are the most talented in town." "And I learned to tie my shoes by myself," shouted Timmy, showing his feet. "And I found out that the hen Henrietta is hatching eggs," announced Lily excitedly. "Does that mean we're going to have chicks?" asked Timmy, excited. "Yes, it does," confirmed Mrs. Dorothy. "Our family is growing even more." That afternoon, while all the children played in the backyard and waited for Rebecca to get home from work, Mrs. Dorothy received an unexpected visitor. It was a young woman, about 25 years old, with a baby in her arms. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you Mrs. Dorothy?" asked the young woman. "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" replied Mrs. Dorothy. "My name is Jennifer. I heard about your story and the family you helped. I saw it in the newspaper," explained the woman. "Oh, yes. And what can I do for you?" asked Mrs. Dorothy. "It's just that I'm in a similar situation. My husband left me when the baby was born, and I have nowhere to go," said Jennifer, with tears in her eyes. Mrs. Dorothy looked at the young woman and the baby in her arms and felt her heart tighten. But this time, she knew she couldn't make a decision alone. "Jennifer, would you like to come in so we can talk better?" offered Mrs. Dorothy. "You would let me?" asked Jennifer, surprised. "Of course, let's have some tea and talk," said Mrs. Dorothy, opening the door. When Rebecca arrived from work and found an unknown woman with a baby in her kitchen, she was confused for a moment. "Rebecca, this is Jennifer. She's in a situation similar to the one you were in a year ago," explained Mrs. Dorothy. Rebecca understood immediately. She looked at Jennifer and saw herself a year ago, desperate, with no options, carrying the responsibility of caring for a child alone. "Hi, Jennifer. Welcome," said Rebecca, extending her hand. "Thank you," murmured Jennifer, still unsure. "Children," called Mrs. Dorothy, "come meet Jennifer and the baby." The 4 children entered the kitchen curiously. When they saw the baby, they were enchanted. "He's so tiny," whispered Lily. "What's his name?" asked Emma. "Nathan," replied Jennifer, smiling for the first time since she arrived. "Can I hold him?" asked Ashley. "Yes, you can," agreed Jennifer. Ashley took the baby carefully, and with the experience of someone who always helped care for her younger siblings. Nathan looked at her with curious eyes and gave a toothless smile. "He liked me," said Ashley, beaming. Mrs. Dorothy and Rebecca exchanged glances. They both knew what the other was thinking. "Jennifer, do you have a place to stay tonight?" asked Rebecca. "Actually, no. I'm looking for a shelter or something," replied Jennifer. "A shelter is no place for a baby," said Mrs. Dorothy categorically. "You'll stay here tonight and tomorrow we'll talk about what to do." "I can't accept. You don't even know me," protested Jennifer. "She said exactly the same thing you said a year ago," whispered Mrs. Dorothy to Rebecca. "And look how well it turned out," whispered Rebecca back, smiling. "Jennifer, make yourself at home. This house has room for those in need," said Rebecca aloud. That night, after settling Jennifer and the baby in the guest room and putting the children to bed, Rebecca and Mrs. Dorothy talked in the kitchen. "Do you think we should help her?" asked Rebecca. "What do you think?" returned Mrs. Dorothy. "I think so. But this time it's different," said Rebecca. "Different how?" asked Mrs. Dorothy. "This time, the 2 of us will decide together. As a family," explained Rebecca. "That's true. Now we are 2 mothers deciding if we can help a 3rd, agreed Mrs. Dorothy. "And do you think we have the means for this?" asked Rebecca. "We have a big house, 2 sources of income, 4 responsible children who can help." "I think we do," answered Mrs. Dorothy. "So, is it decided?" asked Rebecca. "It's decided. We'll talk to Jennifer tomorrow about staying," agreed Mrs. Dorothy. The next morning, when Jennifer woke up, she found Mrs. Dorothy preparing breakfast for everyone. "Good morning, Jennifer. How did you sleep?" asked Mrs. Dorothy. "Very well, thank you. It's been so long since I slept in a real bed," replied Jennifer. "And Nathan?" asked Rebecca, joining them. Slept through the night. I think he felt safe here, said Jennifer. Jennifer, we talked last night, and we'd like to make you a proposal, said Mrs. Dorothy. What proposal? Asked Jennifer apprehensively. We want you and Nathan to stay here with us until you can get back on your feet, said Rebecca. But how? You don't even know me, protested Jennifer. A year ago I was exactly in your situation. Mrs. Dorothy offered me the same opportunity, explained Rebecca. And it worked? Asked Jennifer. It worked so well that today we are a real family, answered Rebecca, smiling. You would really do this? Asked Jennifer, incredulous. We will, but with a few conditions, said Mrs. Dorothy. What conditions? Asked Jennifer. You help with the housework, look for work when Nathan is a little older, and treat everyone here like family, listed Rebecca. I accept, said Jennifer immediately. But how can I thank you? By being happy and taking good care of your son, replied Mrs. Dorothy, and maybe one day helping someone else in the same situation. When the children woke up and found out Jennifer and Nathan were going to stay, they were thrilled. Now we have a baby in the family, celebrated Lily. And I'll be able to teach him things when he grows up, said Timmy, excited at the prospect of no longer being the youngest. We can look after him when Jennifer needs, offered Emma. This house is turning into a daycare, joked Ashley, but she was smiling. It's turning into a home, corrected Mrs. Dorothy. Months later, life with Jennifer and Nathan had integrated perfectly into the family's routine. Jennifer got a part-time job at an office, and everyone took turns looking after the baby. Nathan grew up surrounded by affection, with 4 older sisters and 2 grandmothers who competed to see who spoiled him more. You know what I've noticed? Said Rebecca one night. What? Asked Mrs. Dorothy. Our house has become a safe harbor for families who need help, said Rebecca. And does that bother you? Asked Mrs. Dorothy. No. Actually, I'm proud. I think it's our purpose, replied Rebecca. Our purpose, repeated Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Yes, to show that family isn't just blood, it's a choice, and that there's always room for more love, explained Rebecca. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell smiled. 2 years ago, she was a lonely widow without purpose. Now she was the matriarch of a large and diverse family, a mentor to other mothers in need, and proof that love has no limits. Do you think Harold would approve of all this? She asked Rebecca. I'm sure he would. A man who marries a generous woman like you could only approve of acts of generosity, replied Rebecca. Sometimes I dream of him, you know, confessed Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. And in the dream he's smiling, seeing our house full of children. Because he knows you fulfilled both of your dreams of having a large family, said Rebecca. That night, Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell went to sleep, thinking about how life can be surprising. A storm that brought destruction ended up bringing construction. A family that arrived with nothing ended up giving her everything she needed. And now they were building something even bigger, a legacy of love and solidarity. 2 years after the first meeting between Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell and Rebecca's family, the house had been completely transformed. Nathan was already walking and saying a few words, always clinging to Timmy, who had become his protective big brother. Jennifer had gotten a better job and was studying at night to get her accounting degree. Grandma Dorothy, can I ask a question? Said Ashley, now 15. Of course, my dear, replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Have you ever thought about writing a book about our family? Asked Ashley. A book, why? Asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, surprised. Because our story could inspire other people, show that it's always possible to start over, that family is about choice and love, explained Ashley. It's an interesting idea, said Rebecca, who was listening to the conversation. Our story really is special. And we could use the money from the book to help other families, suggested Emma, always thoughtful. Do you really think anyone would be interested in our story? Asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. Of course, said Lily. Everyone who meets us is moved by our story. And I can help with drawings to illustrate it, offered Emma. And I can review the text, said Ashley. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell became thoughtful. Maybe it really was a good idea to document the family's journey. You know what? Let's try. Let's write our story, she decided. They spent the following months working on the book. Each one contributed with their memories and perspectives. Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell wrote the main chapters. Rebecca reviewed and added emotional details. Ashley corrected the grammar. Emma did the illustrations, and even the youngest ones contributed with their memories. When the book was ready, they sent it to a small local publisher. To everyone's surprise, the editor was charmed by the story and decided to publish it. "The Family Born from a Storm," read Rebecca the title they had chosen. "It's beautiful." The book was launched in a small ceremony at the public library. The whole community attended, including the neighbors, the school mothers, Mrs. Patricia, and even the social workers who once threatened to separate the family. "This family taught us that true love overcomes any obstacle," said the town mayor during the launch. "And that it's never too late to start over," added the children's school principal. The book had an unexpected impact. It began to be sold in other towns, and soon letters arrived from moved readers sharing their own stories of overcoming. "Look at this letter," said Ashley, reading one of the correspondences that arrived. "Thank you for showing me that family isn't just blood. After reading your story, I decided to adopt a child who had been waiting for a family for years." "And this one here," said Emma, showing another letter. "Your story inspired me to forgive my mother after years of not speaking." "You see," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell to Rebecca, "our story is really helping other people. It's incredible how a storm that seemed so destructive ended up creating something so constructive," reflected Rebecca. The book's success brought an unexpected proposal. A television producer wanted to make a documentary about the family. "A documentary about us?" asked Timmy, excited. "That's right. They want to film our daily life, our home, and tell our story to all of America," explained the producer who came to visit them. "And do you think we should accept?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell to the family. "If it can help more people, I think so," said Rebecca. "But it has to be truthful without over-dramatization," demanded Ashley. "And it can't disrupt our privacy," added Jennifer, who was now also part of the family decisions. They agreed to make the documentary on the condition that part of the proceeds would go to a fund to help other families in vulnerable situations. The documentary aired on a national television program and touched millions of people. The response was enormous, with hundreds of messages of affection and support. "Guys, look at this!" shouted Emma, coming into the house with a newspaper. "We're on the front page of the national newspaper." "The Family That Taught America to Love," read Lily the article's headline. "That's an exaggeration," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, but she was visibly moved. "It's not an exaggeration, Grandma," said Nathan, who at 4 years old now spoke very well. "You really taught me to love. Fame brought opportunities, but also responsibilities." They began receiving requests for help from families all over the country. So they created Storm Project, an organization that helped families in vulnerable situations to reorganize. "Our goal isn't just to give financial help," explained Rebecca in an interview. "It's to show that every family can rebuild with support and love. And that every community can come together to help," added Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. 5 years after the first meeting between Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell and Rebecca, the family had become a national symbol of resilience and love. But for them, the most important thing wasn't the fame. It was the genuine happiness they had built together. "Sometimes it feels like a dream," said Jennifer one night when everyone was gathered in the backyard. 5 years ago, I was desperate with a newborn baby, not knowing what to do." "And now?" asked Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "Now I have a family, a career, and a son growing up surrounded by love," replied Jennifer, moved. "And I, 5 years ago, was a bitter widow with no reason to live," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell. "Now I'm a grandmother to 6 children and a mentor to dozens of families. And we were a broken family with no home, no hope," said Rebecca. "Now we are an example that it's always possible to start over." "You know what I think?" said Ashley, now 20 and studying journalism. "I think our story isn't over yet." "What do you mean?" asked Emma. "I think we're going to keep growing, helping more people, showing that love has no limits," explained Ashley. "It's true," agreed Timmy, now 15. "Whenever someone needing help comes to our home, our family gets stronger." "It's because love shared is love multiplied," said Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, repeating a phrase that had become the family's motto. Nathan, now a clever 9-year-old boy, ran to Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell's lap. "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to have a big family just like ours," said the boy. "And you will, my love. Because a big family is about having a big heart, not about having a lot of money," replied Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell, kissing the boy's forehead. That night, when everyone went to sleep, Mrs. Dorothy stayed alone in the backyard for a moment, looking at the stars. She thought about everything that had happened since that stormy dawn that changed her life forever. "Thank you," she whispered to the sky, not knowing exactly who she was thanking, but feeling the need to express her gratitude. The next morning she woke up to the usual noise of the house, children getting ready for school, Rebecca preparing the coffee, Jennifer organizing work materials, the dog barking in the backyard. Yes, they had adopted a stray that showed up at the door one day. The chickens clucking. It was the noise of life, of family, of love in action. And Mrs. Dorothy smiled, knowing she had made the right choice on that stormy dawn. She had chosen to open her door to the unknown, her heart to love, and her life to the possibility of starting over. Because sometimes the best things in life come disguised as problems. Sometimes a storm doesn't come to destroy, but to wash away what no longer serves and prepare the ground for something new and wonderful to grow. And sometimes a family is born not from blood, but from the conscious choice to love and care for each other, regardless of circumstances. Mrs. Dorothy's family was living proof that true love knows no bounds, has no color, no social class, no age. True love simply is, and transforms everything it touches. And they continued to be happy, facing life's challenges together, always remembering that family isn't a place where you are born, but a place where you choose to stay. Because in the end, we are all just people looking for a place to call home. And home isn't an address. It's where the heart finds peace. And all of their hearts had found peace in that simple house, with a big backyard, clucking chickens, and lots of love. End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this touching story? Do you believe Mrs. Dorothy made the right decision by opening her home's doors to Rebecca and the children? Leave your sincere opinion about this journey of overcoming and love in the comments below. And if you have a similar story to share with us, tell it there too. We love reading our listeners' real experiences. Thank you so much for your company up to this point. Don't forget to leave your like to support our work and, more importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories we have lovingly prepared for you. See you next time.